My name is Brian Schaefer. This recording is for POS 500 U.S. and Arizona Constitutions for Teacher Candidates. And today, we'll be going over Arizona's initiatives and referendums. We will discuss what they are and how they are created. I will then compare and contrast the initiatives and referendums. I will go over the pros and cons of each, and finally, I will explain how they support democracy as outlined by the Arizona Constitution. First, we must define what an initiative and referendum are. In Arizona, there are two different initiatives and three different referendums. An initiative itself is the ability to create or reject measures or laws that the citizens themselves draft. The constitutional amendment allows voters to approve or reject constitutional amendments that the citizens drafted and are proposing. A statutory initiative allows voters to approve or reject new statutes that are drafted and proposed by citizens. A referendum is the ability to approve or reject measures or laws drafted by the legislature. A constitutional referendum allows voters to approve or reject constitutional amendments proposed by the legislature. A statutory referendum by legislative referral allows voters to approve or reject new statutes proposed by the legislature if the legislature sends it to the voters instead of the governor. The statutory referendum by voter petition is the voters petition the legislature to be allowed to approve or reject the measure that the legislature proposed. The process for creating an initiative is similar depending on which you are attempting to perform. There are two steps, the petition and the ballot. The petition portion allows for any registered voter in Arizona to obtain a form provided by the Secretary of State. It can be typed or handwritten, can either be written in legalese or ungrammatical prose with no assistance from the government. Once drafted, it must be circulated amongst the registered voters, where 15% of the voters for constitutional or 10% for statutory from the previous gubernatorial election must sign the petition, or the petition is not approved to go to the voters. Once it goes to the voters, it goes to the ballot, and the entire state voters can allow or cast down the act. The time frame to collect the roughly 230,000 signatures or 150,000 signatures respectively is approximately 20 months. The time frame of 20 months is a maximum, meaning that the initiator must promptly start after the general election. The referendum process is relatively straightforward. For a constitutional referendum, the legislature triggers the proposal and sends the proposed amendment to the people to vote on the measure. It either passes or it's killed. The statutory referendum by legislative referral bypasses the governor's veto and sends the vote to the people to decide. It's either passed or killed. If the legislature sends the statute or measure to the governor, the measure is passed. Then the citizens may enact a statutory referendum by citizen petition. The citizens have about 90 days to obtain a mere 5% of previous voter turnout, or about 75,000 signatures, to kill a measure already approved by the Congress and the governor. There are three exceptions. Laws with emergency clauses, but they require a higher two-thirds vote to pass in both houses. Laws necessary to support the government. These are things like funding. And finally, new tax laws. Citizens may still use the initiative process to repeal a tax after it's enacted, but sometimes the new tax expires before the process is complete. Comparatively, the initiative and referendum are both ways that the citizens may interject themselves into government actions. Both allow the citizens to affect new laws, measures, or amendments being proposed. Both allow the citizens to directly involve themselves in the day-to-day operations of the government and change the things that they disagree with. If the government wants to impose a higher sales tax, the citizens can tell them no, either by creating an initiative that seeks to overturn the measure or by using the referendum process to repeal the measure before it's enacted. The differences between the two are in how many signatures that are required to impose new amendments or statutes versus how many are required to referendum by citizen petition. The initiative requires that the voters take the initiative to effect change. The referendum merely requires that they show up and vote, unless it's the referendum by citizen petition. The pros of the initiative are that they can effectively alter the rights of the individual citizens. They granted women suffrage. The statutory initiative must conform to the federal and Arizona constitutions like all laws. It allows citizens to enact laws like elected officials, and it forces the government to adhere to the public demands through means like the Voter Protection Act. The cons are that given the high signature requirement, most are fueled by paid circulators. They are typically paid on a per signature basis, so there's a financial burden on the initiators and enhances the probability of signature fraud. It has a technicality of involving a singular subject for constitutional initiative that is often exploited by opponents. Arizona has no geographical requirement, meaning that a single county with a large population could put a measure on the ballot. The forced appropriation of funds means that other programs must also suffer budget cuts in order to provide funding. The pros of the referendum are that it gives the citizens the power to overturn measures the government enacts, whether amendments to the Constitution, laws, taxes, or programs. It forces elected officials to always consider what their constituents want and protects them from the government overreaching. It gives the power of the veto to the people. It allows the legislature a workaround to prevent a majority two-thirds vote on raising taxes for specific programs when the legislature might not pass the measure. The cons of the referendum are that it increases the timeline for new laws, taxes, or funding due to voters having a method to overturn it. The legislature must act in accordance with their constituents to their own detriment for certain scenarios that the voters might battle back on. The legislature might enact a countermeasure to confuse voters, which results in missed economic opportunities. Initiatives and referendums support direct democracy both by allowing the only way to reform the government itself. As with campaign contribution limits, as with campaign contribution limits and term limits for elected officials. Citizens have a way to counter special interests in businesses having too cozy of a relationship with government officials, and it compels the government to be attentive to the constituency. Strangely, it also allows for the governor and other officials to start their own initiatives in the face of legislatures that are unwilling to allow certain programs to obtain funding in the face of the voters who pushed it past them. That's been my presentation on initiatives and referendums. Thank you.